Good afternoon. Welcome to our virtual symposium, Empowering Diversity in Science, Gender in Academia and Publishing, which is brought to you by Angewandte, Chemie and Chemistry Europe. My name is Sandra González Gallardo, editor of Chem, and I'm happy to be your host today for this event, which is part of the IUPAC Global Women's Breakfast Initiative. Today, we will continue the conversations that started on February 9th, and for that, we have invited 3 international speakers who will share their perspectives on the connection between public recognition and diversity in academic science. First, we will have Professor Pernilla Wittung-Stafshede, head of the Genie initiative at Chalmers University, Julia Trattnig, co-coordinator of the Diversity and Equal Opportunities Committee of the Human Brain Project, and Mia Ricci, who is a co-lead for Wiley Research D&I efforts. We will have 20 minutes presentations, and after each presentation, there will be 5 minutes for questions. Please use the chat function to post your questions to each speaker by mentioning their name. We will ask questions to you as a poll, which we will be sharing during these Q&A short sessions. All of the Q&A sessions and the 20-minute panel discussion at the end of the 3 talks will be moderated by my colleague, Lisa Pecher von Angewandte Chemie. If you have any technical issues, no video connectivity or any other problem, please let us know in the chat, and my colleagues Anne and Rosalba will provide support. Now, I'm happy to introduce our first speaker, Professor Pernilla Wittung-Stafshede, who obtained her PhD at Chalmers University of Technology in 1996, followed by a postdoc at Caltech. After almost 10 years as a professor in chemistry in the US, she returned to Sweden in 2008 and became a professor at Umeå University, followed by a move to Chalmers in 2015. Her research centers around protein biophysics with a focus on copper transport and amyloid formation. She is a Wallenberg Scholar, member of the Royal Swedish Academy of the Sciences and the Nobel Committee for Chemistry. She heads the Genie initiative at Chalmers. So please, Pernilla, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So I will share my screen here. And now you see my PowerPoint, and okay, so now you see my PowerPoint, and
yes, we do.
And you see me as well.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much for this introduction. Thank you for having me, and thank you for organizing this event. I think it's wonderful that I hear so many people listening to this, looking at this. So what I will talk to you about today is female faculty, why so few and why care. And I start out with this picture because I think it illustrates the problem that we will discuss really well. This is the chemistry department at Tulane University in New Orleans in year 2000. This is the faculty. And that's me. I'm the first female professor they recruited, and I'm the only one during the years I was there. And when I left, it took them 15 years to find another woman to recruit to the faculty. But before I start to talk about gender equality issues, I want to briefly mention my scientific background. And we can do it quickly because you already heard kind of the major points. But it's important because we build our views from our experiences. So it's good to know where I've been. So I'm Swedish. I was born in Sweden. I got my PhD, as you heard, from Chalmers in physical chemistry. Then I moved to America to do a postdoc, and I stayed in America because I got this faculty position at Tulane University in New Orleans. I spent 5 years there. Then I was recruited to Rice University in Houston, Texas, and I spent another 5 years there. Then I went back to Sweden, to Umeå in the north, to be a professor in chemistry. And after 7 years there, and now 5 years ago, I've returned to Chalmers University because they started a new department and wanted to focus more on life science. And I became part of that kind of building up. And my research is about proteins, but it's really basic chemistry research with a touch towards diseases. But that's not what I'm going to talk about. But when I returned to Sweden in 2008, I was surprised. Like everybody else outside Sweden, I thought Sweden would have solved the gender equality problem. And I realized slowly when I returned that Sweden is not as perfect as one would think. And now the more senior I get, the more I realize the problem and understand the problem. And I'm now in a position to speak up. So I feel like I must do it for my younger colleagues and for my two daughters. So when you talk about gender issues, inequality, promotion of women, sexual harassment, family planning, childcare, there are several common responses that people give, or truly resistances. And my approach has been to identify these responses and address them with scientific evidence. We all have personal stories, and they are very important to share and talk about. But it's also important to know that there's real facts. You cannot have any opinion about gender equality because there is data. So the most common responses I think people give are the following. There's no problem. Denial of anything being wrong. It's fine. Or it's a woman's problem. There's nothing I can do. It's biology. Women are not as good as men. Or people that would say that I don't do anything wrong. I've done training, I follow policies, and we have a lot of policies today. So everything is equal now, and I'm fair. Or we have people that say, it's not my problem. I don't care, it doesn't affect me. And finally, some people would say it's been too much already. Women are too favored today, and they start to complain about details. So what I will do now in my 20 minutes is to show that these responses are wrong using data. And in the end, I'll come with some suggestions for actions. So first, there's no problem. Well, there is if we look at the numbers. We have few female faculty in academia. This is data from my university with professors to the left and students to the right. So it's kind of going up the ranks. But the higher the rank, the fewer the women. At my university, Chalmers, 17% of the professors are females. That's actually the worst in Sweden. And we didn't get our first female professor until 1984. I want to point out that most universities, non-engineering universities, both grad students and undergraduates are 50-50 men and women, but not my universities. We have a problem there as well. So if I look at universities in Sweden, which I show here, the percent female professors, the average is about 29%. And here you can see that my university is at the bottom, and I think that's why we actually got our act out to do something now, which I will mention in the end. But this is not unique to Sweden. It's the same trend in all of Europe, or actually in the whole world. There are few female faculty. And I just want to show data for chemistry professors because we are a chemistry community here today. But it's the same trend there, very few female chemistry professors, and it's not much change over the years. So if I look back at my data and I go back 10 years or so, I can see that there's been about 1% increase in female professors per year for the last decade. So some people would say that it's just to wait, and then you're fine. We have equality. But there are two problems with that. First, we have to wait a very long time. At my university, we have to wait 33 years. I will be retired by then, by many years. And the other problem is that when you reach about 25% females at the top, progression often stops. This is a universal trend in many professions, unless you actively work to do more. And I think that's where Sweden is stuck, and also the world or Europe as well. So we need to more actively work to do more. It's not a lack of female candidates. University students have been 50-50 or a bit more females in Sweden since the 70s, and also in other countries, both on undergraduate and at least in the last decades on graduate levels. So somehow men are enriched in academia. And we depict this as the leaky pipeline, where we lose women on the way, or the glass ceiling, where women hit an invisible roof when they reach too high up in a system. But there is a problem when we look at numbers. Then we have people that say it's a woman's problem. Well, let's be very clear. If we look at traits such as ambition, IQ, analytical ability, cognitive performance, problem solving, verbal processing, social variables. There is no gender difference. There are variations, but the variations are as large within a gender as between the genders. So there's not a biological difference in the ability of women to become professors. If anything, girls do better in schools than boys. So what is it? Well, it has to do with society, norms, and culture, and we call it unconscious bias or implicit bias. This has become a popular term today. Many universities have started training, and it sounds good, but it doesn't really work. Go half an hour and you're back to normal again. And I want to illustrate this using my only movie, A Cat and a Cucumber. So what I want to show here is jumping to conclusions, that we have built-in expectations. This cat thinks the cucumber is a snake, so he gets afraid. And that's an instinct, because you should be afraid of snakes. And even if this might be an indoor cat, has never seen a snake, he will still react like that. And what I want to say with this is that historical and cultural norms rule in society, and they're so built into us that we are not aware of them. They're unconscious. There's something called the Harvard Implicit Association Test, where you can also associate words with each other. And this test shows that most people associate science with men. And I've done this test. I also associate science with men. But it's not a woman's problem in terms of ability. It's bigger than that. Then we have people that say, it's not me, I've done training, I follow policies, and I'm fair. And we have so many policies today. Well, yes, I think most people want to be fair. But again, the skewed norms rule unconsciously. And I'm going to show you some examples. Here are words used in recommendation letters. To the left, we have male-associated words, and to the right, we have female-associated words. And if you look at these words, we would all hire the man. It's just much stronger words. Also, if we look at teaching evaluations of teachers, female teachers are rated lower by students for the same output in all fields. And also, female teachers are often valued for looks and sexuality that men teachers are not. And this is important because this type of data is often used in promotion cases. Truly, there's some bias against women all over academia in all the different parts that we need for our merits. Early on, more than 20 years ago now, it was shown that women needed to have more publications than men to get the same competence score for Swedish Research Council grants. We would hope that this is better today and the evaluation is more fair, but there are recent studies that show that there is still positive bias for men in evaluations. And many granting agencies have lower success rate for women than for men. And I'll show you some examples. Here are ERC advanced grants. These are very prestigious and we all want one. Typically, 25% of the applicants are females, whereas 20% of the grantees are females. And you might say this difference is not so large, 5%, but it makes a difference when it comes down to every study section. Because then per study section, there's only 1 or 2 females that get a grant. So it becomes a really fierce competition for that single grant that goes to a woman. Also NIH, the biggest funding agency in America, has over the years had lower success rate for women than for men. Many funding agencies are thinking about this today, and some are very proactive. But I think often they make it too easy for them because many times they aim for the same percent females among the applicants as percent females among the granted. And this makes sense if the quality of the applications are on average the same between men and women. But from what I will say when I come to confidence, I think this is not necessarily true. Also, publications. It's very important for your career to have a long publication list. It's harder to get published if the senior author is a woman, and those papers get less citations. Large studies of large databases show this to be the trend. And some of these papers even predict that it would take 100 years to reach parity in certain scientific areas. But I'm not going to say so much about anything more about publications because we'll have a special talk about that. What I think is a very interesting study is what I call the John and Jennifer test. Here, scientists in America sent out a CV to faculty for a person that applied for a job in the lab. And in half the cases, they called the person John, and in the other half, the person was called Jennifer. And then they collected responses, how these faculty would evaluate this candidate for a job. And the results were striking. John was offered a much higher salary. He was deemed more competent, and he's more hireable, and they would mentor him more. Although it was the same CV that was sent out. And I think this shows two things. First, it shows that both men and women show bias. So it's not just men, it's all of us. And second, it shows that we in academia also have bias. It's not that this is just for others and we are so objective in academia. But all the things that I mentioned create a negative spiral. Women are disfavored in every step. They get less merits, and eventually they leave or have to leave academia. So we're not fair yet. Then we come to the people that say it's not my problem. I have a lot of those friends. Many people tell me, Pernilla, it's great that you look into gender equality, but I don't want to be involved. I don't want to be, you do that. Well, then it's important to remember that homophily is not most successful. Homophily means here really men choose men, you choose alike. And because women are a minority, they are tough against other women, just as an instinct to survive. And we have something called complicit masculinity that flourish, meaning that men quietly support the culture. Women too, but by doing nothing, you support what's there. But truly, we need women's different perspectives and approaches to solve the world's problems. The world has a lot of problems today. And in recent years, 5-10 years now, there's coming out studies that show that diverse teams publish higher impact papers and do better science. And that's what we want, right? That's what universities want, to do as good as possible. Here's another paper that shows that more diversity and gender balance give higher scientific success. And it also improves the work environment for everyone. And in this study, they could even calculate the critical mass of women that was needed to get effects. But they also show that you can't just put in more women to get a change. You also need to work on the climate and the culture. Another study from last year, where they looked into publications from PhD students in America over a number of years, they could show that females and minorities contributed to the papers with the highest scientific novelty. So what I want to say with this is that gender equality is not about being kind. Yes, it's about being fair, but it's also about success. And that makes it everybody's problem. Finally, we have people that think it's been too much already. Today, we have to be so politically correct. You can't even give critique to a woman because everything will be taken as a gender issue. But these people miss the big picture and they start to pick on details. We have something called everyday microaggressions, tiny, thoughtless, offensive things that people say to women, and this could be to minorities as well, on a daily basis, like some of the examples I have on these pictures. They might not be so bad one-on-one, but they build up, and eventually we believe in them. It might not be okay anymore, but it still happens. And this affects women's confidence. And there's something called the gender confidence gap. Studies show that women underestimate their confidence, whereas men overestimate confidence. When women attribute success to others, we were a team, we helped each other, whereas men more happily attribute success to themselves. And this is important because it's easier to see confidence and competence. It goes faster. And overconfidence in men, this was shown in studies on college students, that it gives them higher status and more benefits. So this fuels a deleterious cycle of gender imbalance. And I think this affects how women dare to apply for prestigious grants or not. And there are studies now that show that men apply more and women less compared to their representation in their field. So for example, ERC. So it's not too much yet. And actually, if it had been too much already, my numbers on the first pages would not show what they show. So what can be possible solutions? Well, I think a key question to ask is, does everyone really want change? Many men will lose power. Things will not be as is, and that can be scary to some people. And the point is not that women should become men. We should appreciate the diversity and the differences. So here I think it's important to show this gender harassment iceberg metaphor that I borrowed from the National Academy of Sciences in America. Here we have this iceberg, and over the waterline, we have sexual harassment. That's illegal. This got a lot of attention after Me Too, and universities are doing a lot of things to try to counter that this does not happen. And that's very important. But we have a lot of ice below the surface that we can't see. Here we have all the small things, the microaggressions, the comments, the biases, the stereotypes, the non-events, exclusion, and so on. They're legal. But what we need to do is to melt all the ice. We can't just chop off the top. We need to get rid of all the ice. And then it's important to remember that policies, laws, vice chancellors, they cannot melt the ice on their own. We all together must change the academic culture, because we are the academic culture. So with that, I don't think there's any magic bullet, but many things that must happen if we want change. We need to put gender equality at the top of our strategic agenda, at our universities, in departments, and so on, wherever we are. And we need to collect data so we know the facts, and not just think that we know that it's like this or that, and be open with the facts. And we need strong and active leadership in each department at each university that really puts this question at the forefront. And we also need to remember that we need to do tailored work. Departments, universities differs. There are different challenges, there are different possibilities. It's not one solution fits all. And we need to be more educated. We need to become more aware of our biases and try to, be aware so that we can think twice the next time. And we need to use meritocracy in all hirings and promotions and so on. And also consider quality over quantity for the biases that I noted before. So I think to make a difference, one needs a combination of female recruitment and support to get the numbers up, but also long-term actions for cultural change. These two things go hand in hand. And the key to success will be to get the majority, also many men on board. Both formal and informal leaders need to become engaged and want to be engaged. And academia has a lot of informal leaders that play key roles. So all these things that I kind of mentioned on this slide is what we're trying to do at my university now. We started something called the Gender Initiative for Excellence, or Genie in short, an initiative to try to increase success at the university by promoting gender equality. And I think that Genie has potential for success because it's different from other initiatives in at least 3 ways. We have money. We got about 30 million euros for this initiative. So it's a lot of money for a gender initiative. And it's long term. It spans over 10 years. We now just started the 3rd year. But the idea is that everything that we start and gets going eventually can become habits before we end the initiative. And it's led by faculty. I lead this, and my vice leader is another professor in another department. And I think that's extremely important that we go out and speak on campus to the other faculty and try to get them engaged. That helps a lot to get action going. And the idea with Genie is to catalyze action and not just talk, but to do things. But we also know that there's no point to force anybody because studies show that that will just backlash. So with that, I want to end with my last slide. What we all can do now, regardless of funding or money or not, wherever we are, we can push on our leaders to act wherever we are. And I think it's important that we speak up when things are wrong. We cannot be quiet anymore. You have to tell people when things are not okay. And you can get engaged in gender topics on your local level. Collect data, organize a seminar. There's so many things. And we all need to highlight, support, and encourage women around us. And real change will take time. And I think that that's kind of frustrating sometimes to think about. But all small actions are important. And the more people that are on board, the easier it will get. And with that, I want to say thank you very much. That is my email address if anybody wants to contact me. Thank you very much.
All right, Pernilla, thank you very much for that presentation. That was really instructive. Yeah.
Did I stop my sharing?
Sorry?
Did I stop my sharing?
Yeah, so.
Okay, good.
So everyone who's watching, you can now ask your questions to Pernilla in the attendee chat. Maybe I can start with a question I had when I looked at your slides. So there were two things that I found kind of work together. So you talked about the grant success rate, how it is lower for women who apply than for men who apply. And I was thinking, okay, maybe double-blind reviewing could solve this. But you were also pointing out that men tend to be overconfident. So what's your assessment of that? So could double-blind reviewing of grant applications work, or will the overconfidence still be a factor that influences it?
I think that's one way to go that will help. It might not be the whole solution, but I definitely think that you can try to, it's also about how you evaluate the merits, right? And how you think about, because a lot of the grant applications are scored based on your merits. And if there's a bias in how you kind of collect your merits, that's going to be tricky. But I think we need to boost confidence or be more clear exactly what we require or not require. So it's more, so you don't have to make your own judgment when I'm ready to apply for something.
Okay.
But that's tricky because we evaluate our merits so much, right? So there you have your names. It's very hard to make things gender blind.
Yeah, right. So there's a question in the chat by Emily Hunt. Thank you for a really nice talk. Do you know why 25% specifically is the number lots of professions get stuck at? I've seen that in a few places too.
I don't know why, but I know it's in that ballpark, and maybe that's because I don't know this, but maybe it's because you reach a certain level, it looks good, but then, it becomes a threat if you actually reach closer to 50-50. So it's kind of a way to, be inclusive, but not go the whole way. So it's kind of a way of the system to try to stay where you are anyway.
Okay, thank you. There's another question by Laura McConnell. Is there a central repository of gender data for university professors in different countries?
No, because I tried to look for that now when I wanted to show data for the different countries or the whole world. EU collects data and they publish its reports for how many female men are in different categories in science, and maybe some data is also divided per scientific field. But we started at my university now to publish that openly on the website for every department and every division and every level, so anybody can go in and see. It looks bad, but it's better to know that. But I think that would be a way to collect data so we can compare. Then it's also very different in different countries. How large fraction of the faculty is the highest level professor, or how many. In some countries, there are very few people that get to professor. In other countries, it's like half of the faculty is a professor. So it might depend on that too. But I think collecting data and trying to be open with it and share between countries is really helpful.
Yeah, so I think the other two talks will also tell us a bit more about data. There's another question by Anya Zelianovska. Could anything be done, for example, by HR managers, deans regarding this? Could we require action if we are witnesses of gender inequality or bias?
Yes, I think that's where we come to now, that we realize that we need first thing, we need the faculty and the academics or the scientists to be involved. But we also need HR to be on our side and to work. And we need the leadership. We need the vice chancellors. We need the heads of departments to really kind of promote this and therefore benefit good behavior and kind of, punish, maybe not, but, there has to be consequences. Because if it comes from the top that you reward, telling when things are wrong, trying to address it, then it will happen.
Okay, I think we have time for one or two more questions. So Jennifer Lee is asking, what do you think are the specific barriers to women in chemistry as opposed to academia in general?
I think chemistry is very interesting because chemistry has chemistry has a lot of influx of women. I mean, if you look at undergrad and graduate student and even postdoc levels, it's almost 50-50. But then still, if you look at the faculty, you lose the women. I mean, other topics like physics, you have very few students on the lower levels, and I mean, it's low all the time. But chemistry seems to have a special problem because we lose the women. And we have tried to analyze why that is by looking at people that leave. Why do they leave chemistry? Quit or stop after the postdoc or something. And I mean, comes back to the culture and the way we behave and the inclusion, who's in and who's out, and how then often women don't feel that they belong there. So I think it's probably because it's kind of a way of culture, and you have these kind of strong faculty that include some and exclude some, and it becomes very. But I think chemistry is interesting in that respect because we should learn from chemistry somehow and be able to fix it because we have people, many women that do chemistry.
Okay, thanks a lot. So I think due to the interest of time, we should move on to the next presentation. So some of the questions that are still open in the chat, I will note down that they might be asked in the concluding panel discussion. So now I will hand over to Sandra again, who will introduce the next speaker.
So thank you all for your interesting questions. Now I would like to introduce the second speaker, who is Julia Trattnig. Julia obtained her bachelor degrees in Roman languages and political science at the University of Vienna, and she then obtained her master degrees in Roman languages and gender studies at the University of Graz, Austria. She worked in the media sector and for different NGOs, focusing on feminist education, culture, and politics, as well as anti-discrimination. Since 2020, she is working as consultant for Convelop and has, as such, joined the Human Brain Project in the task for gender mainstreaming and diversity management. Together with Karin Grafenik, she co-coordinates the Diversity and Equal Opportunities Committee of the Human Brain Project, adding her background knowledge on gender, diversity, equality policy, and content analysis. Julia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction, Sandra. I'll just share my screen. I hope it works. Oops.
Yes, now we can see your slides.
Yeah. Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much. So thank you very much for having me. Thank you for the opportunity to being here and share my perspectives and our perspectives on tackling biases in academia. And thank you also for the introduction. As you already said, my colleague Karin Grafenik and I are responsible for gender mainstreaming and diversity management in the Human Brain Project, which is a European flagship project funded by the European Commission. And as such, we offer support for recruiting procedures and career development, where the issues of biases in academia are also part of our work. As you said, my background are in political science and gender studies, so I'm not part of the chemistry community, which is why I'm even more honored to be here with you today. So firstly, I'd like to give you a short overview of my talk. I'll start with elaborating different dimensions of biases and focus on citation and publication biases as examples, which become visible in the so-called H index. Then I'll go on to say what we can do to empower diversity in science, which is to consciously incorporate such indices as the H index, to reflect on them for the different communities, and to question what are the underlying structures and the culture, just as Pernilla also has said. And we have initiated this approach in the HBB, also with the support of a conscious leadership and offering further anti-bias support provided in guidelines and other support trainings. So first of all, the question is, where do biases in academia stem from? Scientific excellence is seen as the base for success in academia, and there are metrics to measure scientific excellence. But however, these metrics are biased, also often unconsciously. So biases in academia are rooted in the definition and also evaluation of scientific excellence, which is linked to productivity, and thus also to meritocracy, which means to the idea that merits can be achieved equally by everybody. However, this is not the case, because achievements depend on preconditions, and these preconditions can be different. So scientific excellence must be understood as a social construction which is embedded in a social context, and thus subject to multiple cultural and political influences, which Van den Brink and Benchop have highlighted. Gender inequalities can be found on several levels, among others on the number of publications and citations, which I will focus on in the following examples, but also in peer reviews, promotions, grant fundings, and credit for collaborative work. For the following, I'll take citation and publication biases as examples, and I'll focus on gendered biases. However, these differences between men and women researchers are, of course, not exclusive. It means that gender is always intertwined with other identity traits such as ethnicity, class, age, or sexual orientation. The gendered biases that can be found concerning citations and publications are that women publish less. Van den Bessel and Sandstrom have found out that women are less productive, and this less productivity can be linked to less resources, because women are often in lower positions, have other contracts than men, and thus work, for example, more often part-time. Additionally, formal academic skills are also undervalued, like teaching, management skills, etc. Furthermore, women are cited less often, which leads to the question, who cites whom? Women are cited more often by other women than by men, which shows a clear gender gap citation problem. Homophily, which Pernilla also mentioned, which is the tendency to work with someone similar than one's own, is one part of the explanation for this gender citation gap. It means that there is a gender homophily between authors who co-publish more often with people of the same gender, with researchers of the same gender. Furthermore, there is the so-called Matilda effect. That means that female scientists are systematically under-recognized. More scientific quality is associated with publications from male authors. Furthermore, women are more often asked to add honorary authors to their publications. So all these citation and publication biases become visible in the H index, where thus huge differences are possible in these numbers. The H index measures the number of publications which have been cited H times and is easily available via Google Scholar or Web of Science. However, the H index has been criticized for several aspects. One of it is that it is uncomparable between different scientific disciplines because it considers papers only, so no books, which are more important for arts and social scientists as well as national language literature. But H index is only for English. Furthermore, the H index is a simplistic expression of scholarly productivity. It reduces productivity to writing papers only, and under-evaluates other academic skills, such as teaching skills, management, etc. And it is also some sort of discrimination against researchers who work part-time because they have less time to publish. And more often, researchers who work part-time are women. Furthermore, it is a reflection of imbalanced citation practices, because citation practices of men tend to cite other men, as we have seen before with the factor of homophily. Therefore, based on Van den Besseler's vicious cycle, we can see that there are biases in the whole publication cycle, and all elements of this cycle are affected by these biases and stereotypes. Because gender stereotypes lead to less resources for female researchers, which again leads to lower productivity, and then to less publication and networks. Less publications also lead, of course, to less citations, which again lead to a lower H index, which results in confirming maybe existing gender stereotypes. However, one of the solutions would be to consider alt metrics. Alt metrics are so-called alternative metrics. For example, articles which are penned by female authors in social media and blogs. But also these alt metrics have turned out to be biased, as articles penned by female authors receive less attention. The consequence would thus be to look consciously at this diversity for us. It means to tackle biases and empower diversity by considering individual situations. This means to reflect consciously on differences in CVs of women and men, to consider the context and the underlying framework conditions, which contract was the reason for the productive period, which grants that the researcher have. It means to focus on productive periods instead of only taking numbers such as the H index or other indices for recruiting and evaluation. These numbers can be a starting point, but should not be the only defining component. It also means to reflect on conscious and unconscious biases with training and other support, and to be aware of aspects that are behind them, and to reflect on the underlying problems, such as the gender science stereotype, which Pernilla mentioned in the Harvard Association text. So it really means to see what is behind that and to work on the context and work on one's own stereotypes and biases. Furthermore, it means to apply an intersectional approach, because when I look consciously at such individual situations and differences, it makes it possible to consider various diversity dimensions, but also structural biases. In the HBB, this approach has been initiated by having a conscious leadership. And to be successful, such a strategy must also be supported by leaders. HBB leaders have committed themselves to equal opportunities and inclusiveness with a letter of personal commitment. This letter includes to reflect on search procedures and the composition of decision-making bodies, as well as a checklist that addresses certain points, such as the proportion of women, transparent recruiting procedures, career development, and support for team members. Furthermore, this conscious leadership also includes a cascading model, which means to have women and men represented in proportion to the level below, and thus counteract the leaky pipeline. It means that the share of women should be in proportion to the level below also. And if the reason that the share of women is not in proportion to the level below is discrimination, the HBB will endeavor by all means to fix that. So persons with a leadership responsibility stand behind this approach. Furthermore, anti-bias support is offered in internal guidelines as well as in guidelines which are related to diversity and equal opportunities, which are also available on the HPB website. The research guideline aims to make researchers aware of biases in the content of research reports and publications, as well as the importance of the composition of the research team. The talents guideline, for example, provides step-by-step suggestions and tools for each level in the recruiting process in order to improve diversity and equality in recruiting procedures. The publication and career guidelines, furthermore, take up the issue of publication biases, which is especially important for young researchers as they then early learn to reflect on their own citation practices and incorporate measures to balance them. So, although alternative approaches have been established, they are still not standard everywhere, which is especially crucial in international projects like the HPB, where different countries and regulations come together and also different cultures come together. To conclude, it is thus important to empower diversity by consciously incorporate these indices, reflect on them and what they mean for the different communities, to make researchers and everyone committed to committed to equal opportunities and committed to empowering diversity, aware what the underlying framework is and what underlying structures are, to see what are the framework conditions and reflect on one's own culture. The HPB has initiated such a process by consciously reflecting on search procedures and also the composition of decision-making bodies, and HPB leaders support this mission for equal opportunities by their letter of personal commitment. Our invitation would be to follow this approach, to follow these alternative approaches, and to reflect on biases, which can both be conscious and unconscious, and to also to change one's own behavior, for example, by changing one's own citation practices and being aware of these underlying structures and the culture, and so to achieve a better and more equal scientific future. Oops. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Julia, for this presentation. So everyone can now ask their questions in the chat, and I would also like to remind everyone that the second poll has opened right before this talk and that the third one will open at the end of the Q&A session. So one thing I found really interesting, what you pointed out, is that the Human Brain Project has that leadership positions and decision-making bodies should represent the distribution of different groups of people, let's say, from the level below. Can you maybe give a little bit more detail on that? Because I think people in the audience who might be part of hiring committees or so would like to learn something from that.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for the question. As I said, the HPB leaders have committed themselves to follow and enhance equal opportunities by this personal letter of commitment. And it includes a cascading model, which means to represent women and men in proportion to the level below. So the lowest level to start is, for example, the master student, and then you go up and up and up. And to have a reference model, the European SHE figures, which offer data on researchers in different positions, are taken for comparison. And with this comparison, one can see if the proportions can reflect the scientific fields, for example, because in STEM fields, the proportion of women is generally lower than in social sciences or arts, for example.
Yeah. So speaking of those guidelines you mentioned, are those available to people who are not part of the Human Brain Project? Or is
yes.
that, yeah.
Sorry,
okay.
Yeah. The guidelines I mentioned, which are related to diversity and equal opportunities, can be found on our website. Maybe I'll post the link later in the chat.
Yeah, okay, that's really great. I think a lot of people will be interested in that. A final question that I have. So you mentioned that the age index doesn't reflect certain, like, let's say, life periods that somebody might be in, or other factors that might determine like the amount of citations or so. Could you imagine that a different metric could be the solution, like a different number, or does the whole concept of having a number representing this needs to be changed?
I think it's difficult because somehow you need some sort of number that can be, evaluated and really that is counting. But on the other hand, also these alternative metrics, these old metrics have shown to be biased. So the number is not really the solution. And so I think these numbers are important to have some sort of starting point, or they can be used as threshold. But it is more important to see what is behind the numbers. So really to look at these CVs consciously that make out the numbers, in fact, because you can see someone with many citations, with many publications can have the same H index as someone with not many publications, but a publication that has been cited a lot. So even if this publication would be from a long time ago, the H index could still be high and the productive period is over. So it would really be important to see what is behind these numbers.
Yeah. And I think we probably also need to reflect on, because sometimes I feel that certain parts of science equate number of citations with quality of the work, which isn't necessarily true. So, but then again, you can't measure the quality of the work with a single number.
Exactly, that's it.
Yeah.
But this is the thing that has to be reflected on and made aware.
Yeah.
I believe.
Okay. I see no more questions in the chat. So thank you again, Julia.
Thank you very much.
Then we move on to our next presenter.
Thank you for your questions again. Now I'm pleased to introduce our last speaker, Mia Ricci. Mia is a publisher at Wiley's research division, leading a team of journal publishing managers for Wiley's US-based proprietary and partner-owned journals in the food, earth, and environmental sciences portfolio. Mia has been at Wiley since 2008, during which time she's held various roles managing journal programs and publishing partnerships in life, health, and physical sciences, focusing on strategies and development to improve science communication and drive impact of academic research. Mia is also the co-lead for Wiley Research Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Actions, with a focus on editorial policies and practices. She is also the co-founder and co-chair of Wiley's first Asian and Pacific Islander Employee Resource Group and current co-chair of the Communications and Outreach Committee for the Coalition of Diversity and Inclusion in Scholarly Communications. So Mia, thanks for being with us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sandra. Okay, I'm going to try to share my screen here. Can you see my screen?
Yes, and we see you as well.
Oh, good. Let me put it on presenter mode here. What am I doing? Let's see. Okay. Okay, so is this looking, are you seeing the presenter mode? I'm having trouble. I think so.
No.
No? Okay. Well, let's see. I think this is okay. Does this look fine? There you go.
So we still see the PowerPoint toolbar, but I think that's fine. The presentation looks good. Yeah. Okay.
Well, let's get started then. So thank you, Sandra and Lisa and everyone. I'm here to talk about, as a publisher, how we're committing to a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive publishing environment. So who am I? I know Sandra just told you a little bit about me, but I'm going to do this exercise that if you're looking at my LinkedIn profile, what can you tell? So you can see my name. I'm Mia Ricci. I look like a woman, possibly American because I'm based in Indiana in the US. I have a degree in journalism. I've been a publisher at Wiley for 13 years, managing journals. She must be a DEI expert because she's a co-chair of a committee on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And possibly Asian. My name sounds Asian. I'm sorry, my name sounds Italian, but I look Asian. And I'm a co-founder of an Asian and Pacific Islander employee resource group. So, but who am I really? So it's nice to meet everyone. My name is Mia Ricci. I am a cisgender woman and I use she, her pronouns. I am not American. I'm an immigrant. I am an Indonesian citizen and a US permanent resident. I was born and raised in Indonesia, and I'm 100% Chinese Indonesian. So my race is Chinese and my nationality is actually Indonesian. I've lived in the US for 22 years now. I'm still nervous about public speaking in English because it's my second language. I'm raising a very stubborn but cute, pretty cute, biracial 4-year-old son. I'm on a journey, a personal reckoning of my racial identity and my role in dismantling bias. I am very honored to be a part of and still, after 13 years, in love with the world of scholarly communications, and I'm dedicated to help researchers, like many of you here today, to communicate your science and make the world better. I am not a DEI expert, but I care deeply about DEI philosophies, and I want all of us to do better. So what was that about? This leads me to the notion that there are many aspects to diversity and they are not always visible. I'll take you to intersectionality, a framework that's already mentioned by the other speakers. This was coined by Professor Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989. And it's basically saying that everyone has their own overlapping identities and unique experiences. And all of that must be considered to truly understand the nuances and actions that's required. So the notion of like lifting all groups is included in this. You know, today we talk a lot about gender and women, but promoting women must include trans women, queer women, women with disabilities, women of any race, nationality, sexuality, religion, physicality, all of that. So when I'm sharing to you today about Wiley's DEI efforts on enabling inclusivity and equity to support all and towards a better representation that reflects the diversity within science. So today's chat, well, I was actually I'm not sure about coming here today. This is a conversation that's long overdue, and I feel that there are so much to be done, and so it feels like, you know, we're making progress, but you know, we're not ready to share. Like Wiley's not ready to share, but you know, my goals today here is to learn from you in the audience and from speakers like Pernilla and Julia, and also share what we're doing, because sharing of the journey is important. We're in a journey, and hope to inspire some of you in the audience to take action. There's bias in the research community, as it's been discussed today, and this includes publishing. What is the role of publishers in all of this? How do we move from conversation to action? And how this is not a competitive endeavor. You know, I will share inspirations from other publishers and journals, and more specifics on what Wiley is doing. So including our approach and how we are approaching publishing with an inclusive lens. So why diversity? I think if it's not clear right now, after Pernilla and Julia so beautifully illustrated already, is that it's simply the right thing to do, and it's long overdue. Diversity and inclusion creates better outcomes in everything in life. There's a survey here on the screen, a chart from a survey by McKinsey, which is a consultancy in the US for management, that's showing that the businesses that have more diversity in it has better financial performance, and over the years, tracking over the years. So for the research community, it's not just about opportunity and representation, but it truly enriches the science. Diverse perspectives leads to more innovations and solutions, avenues of discovery. That, like society as a whole, the research community is not immune to biases. So I'm not going to take too much time here because, again, it's been beautifully illustrated. Well, maybe not beautifully, terribly. It's a terrible situation, but it's been talked about by Julia and Pernilla that despite some progress, research is not as diverse or inclusive as it needs to be. Some of the examples that Pernilla has shown is showing kind of the state in Europe. Me being in the US, I'll pick a few things here. Another example that there's several studies that indicate that researchers with disabilities are half as likely to be employed in the STEM fields. And in the US, this represents as little as 11% of researchers, despite representing 26% of the US population. The NIH has recognized significant racial disparities in funding, and there's societal stereotypes. There's a study that analyzes a decade's worth of STEM characters in film, TV, streaming content in the US, and it found that only 37% are women and about 28% are people of color. So what is the role of publishers in all of this? This is an image that I borrowed from the British Medical Journal that shows the role that editors and journals have in this cycle of injustice, how we're all a part of this. The research ecosystem is complex. It's got multiple stakeholders. There's authors, institutions, academia, of course, publishing, funders. But it does include publishing. It's a big part of it. Julia has cited, a few studies on bias in the publication system and citations. I mentioned here a study that was published in Nature analyzing over 2.5 million scientific publications that found that papers that had more ethnically diverse co-authors were cited more than those that's lacking in diverse co-authors. Yet there's still bias. So again, publishers have a role in this and a responsibility to create real change. How do we get to action? So it starts with an honest look inwards. Why is the industry lacking in diversity? Why is scholarly publishing so white? I remember 20 years ago when I was working through my bachelor's degree and not considering a career in research publishing as a viable option. And I often wonder why. Was it because, at the job fairs in my city-funded public university, publishers, they didn't show up there at the job fairs, or maybe because I was lacking the privilege of participating in unpaid internships, which is common for publishing back then. Or once I did get an internship, which was paid, I see very few other women of color working in my department. So research publishing needs to fix its own diversity problem. We got to fix the house. The Workplace Equity Project did a global survey in 2018, surveying scholarly publishing professionals, and it shows that 81% surveyed as white. The chances of becoming a leader is higher for white men with no advanced qualifications than for Black women with postgraduate degrees. And then despite the industry being 76% women, men are twice as likely to be in senior management roles. So how is Wiley approaching all of this? I want to start again with saying that, I feel that we're making great progress and I feel encouraged, but we're early in this journey. And I think as many publishers are, but it's important to share what we're doing. So our focus is with listening and learning. It starts with that. We have over 7,000 global colleagues, and they help guide our strategy. The executive leadership, it supports this and is accountable. Diversity, equity, inclusion is in their strategic objectives and performance objectives, but the employees design and direct the efforts and drive it. It's important for us to develop the right culture and make space and really commit to real tangible support. And some of the example of the initiatives that we're doing is here on the screen, like employee resource groups, designing our talent practices to be more inclusive and equitable, and creating opportunities for space for colleagues to talk about this and for training and to really engage. There's a few examples here on the screen. The woman in the screen is Amber Cabral. I just attended her talk this week about how to do allyship and advocacy at work. And that was a phenomenal talk. And Amber is a Wiley author. Another event that we did with a Wiley author was this man that's in the screen is Dr. Gerald Wing Su, who did a webinar on microaggressions. We're also supporting other organizations that's working to advance diversity, equity, and social justice. And an example would be our partnership with Leading Roots. This is an organization that's based in the UK. They are an organization that champions Black academics throughout every stage of the career. So we're providing a financial support, contribution, and working together on events that's relevant to them and would help their efforts. We're also a top-tier sponsor at the Black and Rural Conference back in November. So we're doing things, and there's much to do, but I'm encouraged by some of the activities that we've done so far. Before I take you to what I mean by publishing with an inclusive lens, I want to give you this snapshot of the Wiley research community. The numbers are approximate, and this is prior to the acquisition of Hindawi that happened in January of this year. But we have over 1,700 journals that's Wiley owned and society owned. There's over 700 society and association partners, and this part is important because many of you are part of society organizations, and these partners that work very closely with us could also act as change agents, and we can learn from them as well. We have close to 12,000 decision-making journal editors in our networks. And this is, again, where publishers have a big role in tackling, biases in publishing. And of course, there's over 1,500 Wiley research colleagues. Many are on the call, hello, and on the meeting, this is not a meeting, an event. But at the base of this, at the core of it, is countless researchers that we connect with every day, including you that's on the call. So publishing through an inclusive lens. We are trying to make real change through everything that we do. And this includes colleagues working together from every department at Wiley: editorial, production, marketing, data, legal, HR. There's so many of us that's working on this and passionate on it. And some of our focus is here on the screen. We're reviewing and improving the end-to-end publishing experience. This includes, back in December of this year, last year, 2020, we updated our author name change policy to be more inclusive. Recognizing that a reason that somebody might change their name is up to their discretion, and it could be confidential and sensitive. So we're removing two historical processes. One is we're no longer putting a correction notice on the paper once the name is updated, and we're not notifying co-authors of the change. We are looking at our peer review practices and policies. And another important activity and focus is improving the diversity of the journal editorial boards. And to do this, data collection is a big part of this. There's been a lot of talk about data, and data is important, and what's measured gets done, and so we have to figure out where we are now to data. And Julia mentioned the importance of finding kind of a starting point. And when you have a starting point and you could see where you're going and track and really measure it. So there's an article in the New York Times that says, here I put the screenshot about how scientific journals commit to diversity, but lack of data. This is widely known across the industry. And so we're trying to change this. We're partnering with Umbrella Analytics. This is a consultant that they're a data analytics consultant that focuses on efforts around D&I. So they're working together. We're analyzing our journal editorial boards, and we want to see where we want to go and how we get there. We're creating journal diversity plans to help our journal managers and the editors to create real efforts that you could track and measure and with your operations and management of the journal. We want to foster an inclusive environment across the teams, and this means creating tools and training for courageous conversations for our journal managers. And that could mean something like when they encounter bias or racism or discrimination in their job, or how to have to get support or buy-in and get partners to come along in this journey. We're also, creating space to learn more about this effort. As I mentioned, none of us are experts, but we know that we need to do better, and a big part of it is through learning. So we want to create space to learn and lift each other up, and we do this through various ways. We have an editor symposium series where we meet with editors and talk about their issues, and we're adding DEI to the agenda. We started a DEI thought leadership series. This is a written kind of venue, and it's a blog that started, and it's not just written by Wiley colleagues, but we're reaching directly into our community, our authors and leading researchers, to talk about things that are important. Like, are we conducting research in an inclusive manner? Are we putting bias into our system? Those kinds of things. So learning from those who are impacted and in the community. We'll also launch a site called Research in Support of Equity. This is a curated articles and references across Wiley's large library of content on issues such as social justice, police violence, Black culture, and many more. So a little bit about the name change policy and what's happened since we announced it back in December. Well, we had really positive response from trans academia. I put Lisa on the spot here. This is screenshots from Twitter that when Lisa announced, Lisa was instrumental in the update of the policy, and she started it, and many other colleagues work on this really hard. And the response on Twitter and other forms of social media has been really encouraging, and you could see that on the screen. Wiley authors across subject areas are now submitting name change requests, and we found that we have added momentum for wider change with other publishers and across the industry. And now we're getting feedback that we're going to use to continue improvement of the process. It's not perfect. There's always things that we could do better. So we're listening and we're talking about it and trying to find solutions. It also opened up conversations with our partners and editors about, inclusion in general. And across the industry, there's many more changes that's happened since December. COPE, which is an ethical governing body, their working group is in process to update the name change policy recommendation and publish a guest editorial on high-level principles on, what's a good policy. The National Information Standards Organization is developing formal recommended practice on author name changes. That's happening now. So a lot has happened. This is my second to last slide, and I think it's the most important, and what I'm most excited about and encouraged by is the notion of better together. By working together, we can accelerate and extend our learning and our collective impact via joint efforts in the publishing ecosystem. And this means things like joint initiatives. There's the Joint Commitment for Action and Inclusion on Diversity in Publishing that's started by the Royal Society of Chemistry. This has 35 global signatories. When it started back last year in June, it had 9. And now there's 35 across the world. To me, this is a signal that there's an appetite for this, there's a need for this, and everyone is willing to chip in. And then there's C4 Disc. We're also leveraging Wiley's large society network to put DEI as a priority, as an action that we could take on together. An example is we did a session at Wiley's annual society executive seminar where we invite society partners to talk about their efforts. And and then let's see, and we're sharing and learning from each other. No one is excelling at everything, at every part of this, and so by learning from each other we could do better. And so the ACS, for example, who's been doing a lot of great work in this space, they were one of the first that updated their name change policy. Me and my partner Anna O'Brien, we meet regularly with colleagues from the ACS to talk about how to improve the policy and other things that we could do together. We're meeting once a month, and so these connections are being made. Publishers are talking to each other. I've also been encouraged by some other changes that's been happening. The Nature portfolio last year announced a diversity commitment where they are going to report annually on gender diversity, committing to no men-only panels on their conferences and symposiums. And then I think this month or last month, Cell Press announced the author inclusion and diversity statement, which is an optional thing for authors, where they can submit a statement about elements of their study design or authorship as it pertains to diversity. And then the most important part is that engagement from our research community, meaning you, our authors, our editors, it helps drive us forward. You know, we're listening and we're taking what you take and you know, creating actions from it. So these are my closing thoughts. Pernilla said at the beginning of her, or towards the end or in the middle of the beginning of her talk, that real change takes time. And I agree. It does take time. There's a lot to be done, and small actions are important. But, you know, it's also good to remember that what seems like small actions are not necessarily small to individuals. So my goal from you today is to learn. I'm already learning a lot, and then go home. Home, I guess, being Wiley, although Wiley is now home, we're all work from home, but to create actions. And I hope that, you know, you feel a little bit more encouraged that we publishers are truly in this journey together. So I want to thank you for the invitation, and I want to extend an invitation back. Should you want to, you can tell us what we're doing right and what we're doing wrong. And we'll keep sharing our journey. Transparency helps, so we're committed to sharing. So yes, a long way to go, but if I take you back to the beginning of my talk, to the Mia from 20 years ago, and the internship where I'm walking around like, feeling discouraged to see the lack of diversity, you know, the me today, there's still lack of diversity around, but I am much, much more encouraged and a little bit happier that, you know, I see a lot of commitment from everyone that, you know, we want to do better. So thank you so much. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to stop screen sharing. How do I do that? Did I do it?
Okay. Thanks a lot, Mia. That was a really good presentation. So everyone, you can now start asking Mia your questions in the chat, and also the next poll question should be open now. So one thing that I found really interesting in your presentation, that you told us about this workplace equity study that showed that even though 76% of people who work in publishing are women, that most of the leadership positions are still occupied by men. I mean, that is a good example that shows that diversity isn't all that needs to be done. So just because you kind of counteract something, an imbalance in numbers, it doesn't necessarily make everything equitable and fair for everyone. So I was wondering, so how does everything that Wiley does internally, like improving like how the setup is of editorial boards, how does that benefit the authors who will be submitting the articles to us?
Oh man, Lisa, okay, that's a good question. So, so you're asking how a diverse editorial board, maybe gender balance in the editorial board, helps the authors? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Well, I think it goes back to the notion to all of it that let me try to give an example here. I think a part of it that really came real to me is that an example that was brought up by my colleague that has an editor-in-chief, a woman editor-in-chief for one of our journals in the physical sciences, actually. And she was approached, but she was told by an associate editor that they had a complaint from a reader that found an article that was published in the journals to be racist or has racist, implications. And then the associate editor ended up connecting the author with the editor-in-chief, and they worked together to a resolution. And the journal, this is not the only catalyst for it, but the journal, it helps the journal to really look at, D&I and bias in a real way. And I think that the light bulb moment for me was on this is that if I should mention that the author is a minority group, from a minority group, a person of color, and same with the associate editor. So, and then the lesson learned here is that this author would not have reached out to the journal if they didn't find a representation in the editorial board that they feel it's a safe space and I could see them and understand them. You know, if the journal was entirely, you know, white, for example, this author might not have go there. And then the journal would go along in its operations without knowing that they have created harm or possibly lose an author, you know, and the author felt biased and hurt by it. So I think this is an example of, you know, a real life example of an importance about that. I hope that answered the question a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's mostly about trust being built between the authors and the journals, right? Okay, so there's someone in the chat, Kimberly Retzler, has asked 2 questions. I'm going to ask only the first question first. How do you encourage authors, peer reviewers, and so on to share demographic data? Because they may see the question and wonder why the data are being collected.
Yes, oh my God, you know, and to be honest, I was telling Lisa before the call, I'm like, if there's data questions, I'm going to be like, it's because it's so complex and complicated. And I think there's so many questions to ask. But Kim, that is a very good question. I think, you know, one, at Wiley, we're looking at various ways to collect data, right? We're exploring it. One of it is through kind of machine learning or inference analytics, but you have to combine it with a human eye, right? Because there's a lot of things that's missed there. But then there's self-reporting, and I think this is what Kimberly is asking: is encouraging authors and peer reviewers directly. And I think the question is that being honest, and I think it's important and it's critical that you explain why the data is being used, exactly the purpose, and also making it optional. And being very careful also with the language and the options, make sure that you're not creating more harm, either by placing a burden of like, you must answer this data, or this is, you know, the authors might be concerned that this will creep into peer review, or, you know, so I know maybe you do the data not in your editorial submission system, but other ways, you know, outside of that, so it's not connected. So separate surveys, you know, but this is a question that I have, and then we're trying to explore that. The joint collection effort has a data subgroup that, you know, my colleague Anna O'Brien is in there and that subgroup, and is to tackle some of these questions. And we will share that with you, you know, with our partners and whoever's interested. And as more publishers are collecting data and reporting on it, we'll learn together. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So the second question is, what is the most respectful and appropriate way for a journal to share successful improvements in diversity of editorial board, peer review, authorship, and so on?
The most respectful way for a journal to share their success about diversity, well, I think it depends, you know, on what does the journal consider as a success, right? If you know, you have to have a clear objective in the beginning on why you want to diversify your editorial board, and what are you doing when you have it. You know, it's not enough to just like, oh, now the board is 50% women and 20%, you know, black people and 10% Asians, you know, or anything like that. It's what are you doing with the editorial? What are the intention? You know, is it because you want to have representations at conferences or events that the journal is doing? Is it to create more space? Is it to highlight more good research from underrepresented groups? So I think when you are sharing success, you have to define really what success means and the reason behind it. I go back always to transparency and honesty, you know, and I think all that it's important that we're all learning here, and we will make mistakes, and that's also a big part of it. You know, it's not everyone is going to like and agree with what you're doing, but if they know what your intention, and that if they feel that you are willing to take these criticisms and you know, improve or respond to it, even, you know, I think it's a long way. It's better than where we are now, where we're not talking about it really. So
okay. So the next question comes from Kira Welter, who asks, do you think double-blind peer review is a good way to reduce bias in scientific publishing? Which other actions could be taken?
Oh, I don't know the answer. Who's it, Kira? That is a very good question. I mean, there's, you know, this is in my list actually, when I mentioned earlier that we're reviewing the peer review policies, right? Double blind obviously has its advantages of that means that the editor doesn't know, where the paper is coming from, and the author doesn't know who the editor is, and all of this. It's not perfect because there's, I think in some subject areas, the research community is small. I think you could tell who the person is by looking at references of the author say in my previous work, and then that's, it's not perfect. And but I could see the argument of reducing that bias, because then you can't tell who the author is, and you're a little outside the box. But then there's also transparent peer review, right? Where you make everything transparent. You put everything in the open. I mean, the reviewers and the editor's name are published, the review is published, so that you put it in those who are touching the paper to be more intentional on what you say and how you're approaching it, because it's all out there. So I don't have, at the moment, as I'm still learning, my personal preference, but a good maybe middle ground would be giving this as an option to the authors to pick. They could go single blind or double blind, and whatever they're most comfortable with. That could be a solution. It could be a logistical nightmare probably in Scholar One, but you can do it. I've seen other journals that have it. But a very good question.
Although wouldn't having double-blind peer review a choice mean that only some people can afford double-blind peer review and some cannot?
Yeah, right. And then it could be an indication that maybe the one that does double-blind is those that are kind of less established, researchers more early in the career. So I think there's studies that's being done around this, and this is something that we should definitely explore more.
Yeah,
good
definitely. Yeah. So I think, is there another question? Yeah, one by Joyce Hay. Hi, Mia. May I ask, what do you think the current gender diversity in the publishing industry is?
Let's see. I'm talking on behalf of the entire world of the publishing industry. So the current gender diversity, what I think about it, I think it's not acceptable. I think it's absolutely not acceptable. I mentioned earlier that, across the industry, that survey by the Workplace Equity Project, it's 80. What is it? Now I don't remember. What did I put on the slide? It's, the industry is 76% women, but men are likely to be promoted more in senior management role or something. Or no, twice or something like that. And you see it. You see it in kind of leadership positions. So I think that needs to change immediately. And this is also just the gender that so far, the data that's collected, that many of it is still within the binary. So we're not talking about the full spectrum of gender, right? That's not easily captured data that we don't have, and diversity in other aspects, race and nationality and everything. So I think I personally would like to see more balance, for sure.
Okay. So one more question that I have. So you mentioned the joint commitment briefly, but could you talk a bit more about what the commitment actually contains that all these publishing houses have signed?
Right. Okay, so I'm let's see if I could remember all of them. I will drop it in the link in the chat. But from my understanding is that there's 4 different things. One of them includes efforts around data collection. So agreeing to set benchmarks, right? That benchmark is missing. So together to look at data collection efforts, and as you go forward on collecting the data, you share these results. So we create a threshold together across the industry. I'm sitting this way because the sunlight is blinding me in the slides. But one of it is data collection, but which will then be used as one of the things that will be used to set a minimum standards on what are the actions required for diversity and diversifying journals. I think that's one of it, and the other standard is agreeing to share. So anyone that's a signatory can't say no if I go over there and ask, hey, what are you doing about this? We're in a commitment together. So, but I will put a link in the chat after I close my window a little bit there. So.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I think that's all with the questions from the chat. So now we can move on to the panel discussion, which will be the final part. So may I ask Pernilla and Julia to join us again? So everyone who's watching, you can still if you have any questions that you would like to ask all the speakers or also specific speakers, feel free to just put them in the chat. But yeah, so I wrote down a couple of questions that people asked after Pernilla's talk where we didn't have the time to answer them, but I think they are good to stimulate discussion like with all of you. So one of them was asked by Natalie Grob, how do we get men to become active allies? So Pernilla, do you want to start?
Yes, and I don't have the answer because I think that is the solution or part of the solution, that I think by talking about it and getting the data out so we understand it's not just like, poor women that wants to have a better place and we're so, that we see all the data to get men engaged because they understand the problem and they want a better world for everybody. Because I think also it's worth pointing out that by being more diverse and more women or more equal, things get better. We do better science. We have a better work environment. It's a better culture. Everybody gets happier. Also men.
Yeah. If I may add to that, I totally agree with you. And I also think that it's necessary that men really understand what that means to support these diversity equality actions, that they also can profit from more diversity. For example, if they have dropouts in their CVs and not productive gaps due to illnesses or also military services, which are only for men in some countries, for example. And so if these would be more normalized and more diverse, then they also profit.
Mia, do you want to add something to that? You're on mute.
Oh, there you go. Hello, men. Okay, wow. That's a good question. I think they need to listen and educate themselves. I mean, and I think this applies, I think, to if you are not part of a marginalized group and you're on the other side and what you can do to support, and a big part of it is education. You don't go to the person that's impacted and say, what do you want me to do? No, there's already a lot of studies, literature, conversations about this. You could Google it and you could run it. You look around your organizations, you find initiatives like the one that Julia and Pernilla is in, and look at their objectives and look at their mission, and then see which part of those that they could sign on to and they could take the action on, what they're comfortable and where they are privileged and they have the power to support. But they have to make that decision and pick what, but actually do it, not just sit on the sidelines, I think. But listening I think is very important.
Okay. So another question that came up, is there a difference in gender imbalances and inequities between the US and Europe? And I think we can also extend that to other parts of the world. So maybe Julia, can you start? Have you seen something like that in your analyses?
In general, there's the gender inequality quite universal in favor of men, I'd say. But of course, there are differences also depending on countries, also depending on the culture of the country, because this is something that we have seen in the Human Brain Project, for example, that even with staying within Europe, there are these differences from the different countries who also have different regulations. The cascading model that I've mentioned is standard in Germany, for example, in higher education, but it is not in Austria or in other European countries. So there are for sure differences.
Okay. Pernilla, do you want to add to that? Because I think, yeah.
I mean, I think the problem is the same all over, it's just more or less, but I think kind of the background or the society is slightly different. I mean, for example, Sweden is very good in terms of childcare and maternity leave and things like that you don't have as much in America or other places in Europe. So, I mean, conditions might be slightly different. But still, I mean, when we come to power or top positions or doing careers and how we evaluate, it's the same problem. One thing that I noticed as a difference between America and Europe was women that actually survived and did well in America in academia, they were really looked up to in America. I mean, people would know that they fight it really hard to be there. Whereas I would say that it comes Sweden, a woman that's a professor in Sweden, they will be more looked at, oh, maybe she got some special money because she was a woman. You know, very different kind of ways of approaching it.
Mhm.
Yeah, I agree with Pernilla. I think it varies, but there's imbalance everywhere. There's imbalance everywhere in different aspects, I think, of diversity. And this is part of the things that, you know, at least for Wiley, you know, we are a global company. So part of our listening and learning and when we are employing actions is to first understand the global needs, right? That means the cultural differences and nuances. You know, diversity in the US is different than it is in Asia and in Europe, and what are the needs. But what I've found, at least in some of the things that I've read and in conversation with colleagues, that there is always some sort of imbalance, you know, in every part of the world.
So I just see that there's another question by Kimberly Retzlaff to all of you. Confidence was mentioned as a difference between men and women getting promotions. How do you boost your own confidence and support other women to boost theirs? So, Pernilla, do you want to start?
Yeah, I try to, I mean, the older I get, I mean, this is what I try to do, and I feel like I do it, you know, try to do it every day, because I realize that's so important, that we need to encourage each other. And those tiny thoughts of support that you can give to somebody, you know, can make a difference. They dare to apply for something, or they feel encouraged to do this or that. Sometimes I feel that's hard, because sometimes I feel very insecure, but I know I have to behave in a way that kind of, you know, I have this mission, so I have to do it. So sometimes it's tricky, but I think we need to do this in every step, you know, not be quiet, but, you know, talk to the people we know around us.
So what's your opinion on that, Julia, and your experiences?
Absolutely, I can only agree to that. It's really important to encourage each other, and for me, for example, it is very encouraging to be able to be here with you, because I'm still more at the beginning of my career and very young, and so having the opportunity to sharing my thoughts with you is encouraging and is great. And also I think it's important to meet on the same level and see that there are other thoughts and other approaches possible.
Mia, how about you?
Oh my God, I could talk about this for days. There's so much behind this question, like confidence, and especially for men and women getting promotions. So, oh my God, where do I start? But I think what Julia and Pernilla has said is right, that support and that culture of kind of normalizing this and two things I think for me, you know, if I think of the workplace is, you know, I'm kind of a mid-level at this point, you know, mid-level manager. I have a team under me, and I try to create this kind of open culture and encourage, you know, I ask the questions, you know, how do you feel about your career? You know, and so if someone that is maybe shy about talking about wanting their promotion, if you get the encouragement from your manager without feeling like, you know, you will be punished in any way, you know, it will kind of develop that culture of wanting to speak up and talking about that, you know. So I think that's one that you can do, you know, instilling that behavior that, like, it's okay to talk about this, and you should want to share your aspirations, and that you will be heard, you know. But, you know, behind it, obviously you have to advocate, you know. I advocate for all women, you know. So I think the support and the culture is a big part. It's difficult to do. I mean, and it might be out of your comfort zone, and you might look to other people who you find inspiring and confident and talk to them. I think women should look at other women as a network, you know, and not competitive. I'm Asian, so I there's this notion and this thing in the US called the model minority myth, that like Asians are part of it. It's like that we're quiet and submissive, and it's also kind of in our cultural DNA to be, let things slide and not be loud. I'm one of the loud Asians, and I'm proud to be one. And whether that's part of me conditioning myself to go against the model minority myth, or just something I feel is important, you know. But you know, I've been called difficult when I talk about career progression. So wanting, I think probably many women has, but don't let that deter you. You know, I encourage you, and that look let's look to each other as network and support.
Can I add something? Because I also think, I mean, this comes into the importance of having role models, and that we are, whatever we want, we become role models. And I think it's important to show that, you know, this can be fun. This is a great kind of job to do, but also that we're normal people and we have all these problems and all these faults that, you know, we're not perfect. I remember when I was young, I mean, the few female professors that I could read about in chemical engineering news or something, they always like worked 24 hours a day and had no kids and no life. And I realized I want to show that you can have kids and have, you know, family and still do good science. But, you know, it's so I think it's important that we should, and we create a situation where this can be okay.
Yeah. But I'll pick up on that, on the role model thing. And this is where leadership and organizations have a place and a responsibility to make sure there are women and diversity of anything at every level of the organization, especially for leadership. You know, I have been very fortunate in Wiley in the 13 years to have strong women managers. I know a few of them are on the call. Hi, Allison. Hello, Swapna. Hello, Genie. And I've looked to them as role models, you know, and when you see someone above you who has this culture and a supportive thing, it encourages you, you know, but this is something that like the company is responsible to do. You know, you got to fix your pipeline and you got to make an effort to place leadership at the top and all across. Yeah.
So since we are speaking about like how to motivate yourself personally and your network, there's a question in the chat that perfectly fits into that to all speakers. How do I overcome fear?
Okay, I can start because then you can fill in. I mean, to overcome fear, I mean, for example, this seminar today, I always get very nervous. But my kind of way to sort that out is to practice. So I'm not going to tell you how many times I've practiced on my talk, but, you know, that's kind of one way for me, at least, to go through and try to do well. Then it has to, you know, I've done everything I can in a way. So I think that was, you know, the younger before, that was more of a, you know, I had to really be perfect on things to feel at least as comfortable as I could. Now it's more like maybe I'm learning what I'm good at, or you know, that regardless of, I have this background and nobody can take it away from me in a way. It's not a bubble that will pop one day. But I think that's hard, and I think we fight with it every day in one way or another, that, you know, you feel like something will fall apart.
So, Julia, what's your way to overcome fear?
A bit the same. It's also to really learn the most I can and practice and do everything and give the best, because I think that's all one can do. And to overcome this fear, really to also get in these situations where I feel uncomfortable maybe, and to learn from that and grow from there. Because that we're all human, and all we can do is prepare our self for the best and try our best. And then from there, we can only learn and see how it goes.
Mia, would you like to add to that?
I have a lot of fear. I was freaking out before coming on this talk. It's just, I think, I don't know. I agree with what's being said here. I think practice, I did practice, you know. I obviously didn't practice kind of figuring out the present, you know, how to switch slide presenter view and all that stuff. That didn't work out. But I think practice helps for me at least, and being honest about it. And I love what you said, Julia, about we're all human. And I often just be frank about that, you know, I'm human. I mean, everyone makes mistakes, and kind of roll with it. But I think it comes with experience and practice, and, you know, you'll hopefully that you will get there. Yeah, I saw something on the chat that being asked, Lisa, from Lisa, that I think would be good to address.
So I was, before the next question, I would like Anna, our technical helper, to close the polls so that everyone can see the results of like the representation, where everybody is coming from, which gender, which career stage. So I think from about in a few seconds, you should be able to see the poll results. So the next question is by Teresa Kückmann. I'm wondering if there's a way to shift the conversation so that typical masculine behavior, for example, overconfidence, is not the default definition of what is desirable. So, Mia, you said you've seen that question, and would you like to start?
I was curious what Pernilla and Julia think about it, and then I could chip in.
I mean, I think this comes back to some of the things that I mentioned, that we have different confidence, and we kind of, right, still we kind of support the male type of behavior, and overconfidence wins because that's what we see and that's what we, kind of reward in a way. So, and I think this comes back to both awareness, but also about the academic system, both publishing what you count, and that you have your H index, or if you should be that we have to change the kind of the way we do science and the way what this merits in a way.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And maybe we should send all men to a course. I mean, it's not that we need to encourage all women to be more confident and strong and pushy, but we need to make sure that men are aware. I'm speaking generally, but I don't mean all men, but in general, the norm in society, that we open up for that. What do we want?
So, do you want to add to that, Julia?
I can only agree. It's absolutely. I also think that it's a mixture or a completion of both things. On the one hand, to empower women and to get more confident, and this side on really working on oneself maybe, and on the other hand also to change the structures, to not see that confidence is not the same as competence. So to me, I think it's both that would work together.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's definitely both sides. On the system, the behavioral thing, it has to be changed on how we kind of evaluate, right, like success and what are the behaviors that's associated with that. But that support part again I think it's important that like you don't have to be loud or outspoken to be known as successful. And I think again this goes back to the notion of support and women promoting women, is that I think if you have a culture that say you're a manager and then in your team you have a performer that is not that needs a little bit of help or a nudge on and not often to raise their hands, but they have a lot of good opinions and they did a lot of good things. So making that space to invite that person to talk and actually, ping them, let them know before. It's like, oh, I'm happy to bring you into the conversation and share that spotlight with that person, in whatever format that they like, whether it's via conversations in the group or sharing successes via emails. But as a manager, and especially as a woman manager, we need to be supportive of each other and notifying and noticing the nuances between, all of this behaviors and comfort levels and adjusting to it to make sure that we lift everyone up, I think,
Yeah. Something that maybe connects to that. So it's a question I wrote down. So Julia and Pernilla, both of you mentioned in your talks the concept of homophily, that kind of people support people who are like them. So, I mean, this can be good for underrepresented groups, but like for overrepresented groups, it just causes the status quo to stay in place. So maybe a question, how can everyone be encouraged to approach more colleagues that are like completely different to yourself? Julia, do you want to start?
Yeah, thank you. It's a difficult question actually, because it's really so unconsciously in us. For example, because it's easier to collaborate with someone who is similar to yourself. But I think that actually it comes a bit back to the question on confidence, as it would be the same to also try to work together with someone you might think you're not really comfortable is the wrong word, but you're not used to working with, and also with this to challenge yourself and be conscious about this, whom we're working with together, and whom you have in your networks, whom you're supporting.
Pernilla, what are your experiences, and what would you recommend if you have concrete recommendations?
I think it's difficult because I see this a lot, that people recruit from their close environment, and historically that means that you recruit younger men, so it's all these white men throughout universities. I see the opposite. I always had a lot of female students because somehow they come to me because I'm one of the few women, right? And then they come work for me. And maybe that's a good thing, actually, because I can take care of them. But still, how do you get that mix? And actually linking back to this about confidence, I see that, for example, when men evaluate grants, and guys might write bolder than a woman that might write more, details maybe. And then this evaluator would say, but the guys are all better because they have more wilder ideas. But that might be just reflect confidence. So it's very hard, I think, we have to, all these pieces. But I think, again, we come back to this education, learning, talking about this.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. Mia, what's your opinion on the topic?
Yeah, again, agreeing with both of you. I think it's learning and educating yourself on the importance of diversity, and that includes yourself, by fighting against that kind of intrinsic nature of wanting to just connect with someone who's like-minded and you're comfortable with. And it's difficult to do, but as many have talked today, diversity adds to better. That's what it happens, and that means you're reaching out of your comfort zone, and it's something that's difficult. And I try, it's something that it could be hard for everyone, and I try to approach it with the kind of the curiosity mindset, and trying to not assume, because they're different, but assume, I don't know anything intention or anything like that. But if I approach it as me being curious, just to see, and not promising myself to agreeing or disagreeing with an approach of someone else or something, and just strictly just opening up a conversation as out of curiosity, it works for me in that way, and just to get to know and listen. So yeah.
One addition, I also think it could be really important. I'm kind of starting to believe in this more and more now, that it has to come from the top as well. So if there are rewards for doing good, you might do it by the wrong reason in the beginning, but eventually, it builds into you, so it's fine. I've seen that happen, like with recruiting women, for example. And then, so I think we come back to this. We need the leadership, we need action, and maybe we need money. So there's kind of, a reason.
Yeah, right. So another topic I'd like to talk to you about is intersectionality. So I think every one of you has mentioned this in their talks, and I would just like to dig a little deeper into it. Like how can we make sure that our diversity, equity, inclusion measures are intersectional? So Pernilla, maybe you can start. So for example, like how to do this in academia, like in hiring or setting together committees or so.
I think, I was hoping that we wouldn't come to this question, but I think this is a hard question to answer. I think it's important to think about it, but the way I've thought about it is that we should, if we go for women and men, that's 50% of the population. If we can't solve that problem, then it's hard to go to other types of diversity. But in a way, I think also, and studies can show this, that, if we do things that becomes more gender equal, so the system becomes more gender equal, other diversities will benefit as well, because you make things more inclusive and open, and differences are okay. So that's how I would see it. It's not an answer.
Yeah. This question was not meant as something where we have one single answer, because I think if there was an answer to that question already, we wouldn't need to be having that discussion right now. So Julia, what are your thoughts on that, on intersectionality in general?
In general, I think it's key, actually. I think it's really essential for all the diversity measures and equal opportunities measures. And I think that, in fact, the diversity dimensions are not really separable, because Butler already stated that if one is a woman, that is surely not all one is. There are always other diversity dimensions that come into it and that intersect automatically, like age or class or sexual orientation. So I don't really think that it's possible to separate it. I think that it's more important to actually address it and highlight it and make people aware of it and reflect on it consciously, that there is more than one thing.
Mm-hmm. Mia, what do you say?
Yeah, this is a very interesting topic, Lisa. I mean, I talked about intersectionality a little bit, about the notion of, you live one, you live all, right? And I think there's just a few ways I think that you could inject this. There's going to be times where a certain focus needs to be applied to one specific group. For example, like in the US, the Black Lives Matter movement, it's an example of having to focus on one group that's having a crisis, right? If we're talking about journals and publishers, I think what would be good is that for editors and journals is to not take a one and done approach, right? So you can have a special issue in a woman in science, but then maybe follow up with an issue about, Black researchers in science and so on and so forth. So it's not just one and done. And just at the core of it too, I mean, we talked about diversifying journal editorial board, right? Say, if the journal is diverse and there's, truly a diverse group, when you're doing a woman in science special issue, the editors will be contributing nominations and inviting authors from all aspects of diversity, everything that's in women, trans women, queer women, Black women, Asian women, and this is again another important why you need to have a well-rounded and truly diverse, editorial board for journals. Yeah.
Okay, thanks a lot. I think we can come to the end. I have a final question for every one of you. So what are your hopes and wishes for diversity, equity, and inclusion measures in the near future? So what do you hope can be achieved in the next few years? Julia, do you want to start?
Yeah, thank you. I hope that the things that we mentioned today, that we've been talking about, these issues, become more standard. Actually, that's my hope for the future. That they're not the alternative approaches, but the standardized approaches, because they're really necessary, in my opinion, and the only way to empower diversity in science.
Pernilla, what are your thoughts and wishes and hopes?
Well, I want action. I think we have talked, over my now almost 30 years in science, in my early years, I didn't even speak about this, right? It was no issue. I was the only one, and that was the way it was. Now we speak about it. It's a real topic, gender equality or diversity. And, we have offices and things, but I still feel like we talk, but the actions are not there. So we need more action and we need more commitment so things happen. But I think it can go fast, because it's like we're on the edge to something. And I think an event like this is wonderful. There's so many people that can listen in and can go home and do something and at least get encouraged or yes, I hope to see real change.
Yeah, I think so do we all. Mia?
The same. Real change is good. In the next 5 years, I think specific to the publishing industry, I think that could be achievable is data, right? We talked about that is definitely an effort that we are lacking in, and there's a solution to it. So 5 years is definitely achievable. I would love to be able to see data benchmarks for different, aspects of diversity across all subject areas, in the world. I think data is one of it. I would like to see more people like me in publishing industries and conferences and panels and much younger me's, everywhere. I think that would be amazing. And I don't know. I think, yeah, I would like us to figure out some of the policy, like kind of the policies that's outdated, that we could be. I would like to see the name change policy adopted everywhere. I think that would be good. And eventually, in the long term, I would like to work myself out of this job, because by then, you don't need committees. Like everything is embedded. I think it would be the end goal is to see truly having equity and inclusion as part of the day-to-day. It's just on how you run it. It's not an additional thing. It's just become part of everything that you do. I think that would be phenomenal.
Okay, that sounds like a good closing word. So yeah, I think I'm going to conclude the discussion here. And so thank you, everyone, for speaking at today's event and for taking part in this inspiring discussion. It's really been a pleasure to me, and also I think for everybody else who has watched. So I think the take-home message of this whole event is like that people from different parts of research can come together and connect. We have Pernilla from academia, we have Julia from consulting, Mia from publishing, and we can come together and work together to make things better for the research community. I mean, nobody sits in an ivory tower, and we can achieve so much more by working together than working individually. So also I'd like to emphasize what Mia said during the end of her talk. So to everyone who's watching, feel free to reach out to all of us, to be it journals or publishers, or be it senior academics or consultants. If you have an idea or would like to share a thought, how we can make things better, how we can make academia and publishing more inclusive, equitable, and fair. And it could start with a tiny conversation, but tiny conversations can lead to huge positive outcomes. And with that, I would like to thank everyone again and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.